Juliana, would you like to go ahead and get us kicked off tonight?
Thank you, Shelby. Welcome all, and thank you for joining us this evening. Now, I am pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Keith Frey. Recently retired from his full-time career as a physician and executive, Dr. Frey now invests his time as a leadership developer, healthcare consultant, and strategic thought leader. Dr. Frey has 40 years of experience as a primary care physician, educator, mentor, coach, and executive. His career has included major leadership roles at Duke University, Providence Health, Mayo Clinic, and Dignity Health. Dr. Frey has a passion for developing leaders who are influencers, avoid their personality derailers, and are emotionally healthy. With decades of experience as a physician leader, Dr. Frey is more than qualified to guide tonight's discussion on the role of influence and awareness in transformative leadership. On behalf of ArMA, thank you, Dr. Frey, for taking time out of your busy schedule to lead tonight's webinar. Without further ado, Dr. Frey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliana and Shelby, for your support tonight, and welcome, colleagues. Thank you for investing some time this evening to talk about and think about leadership and how we can continue to grow our leadership influence. And I want to give you a model that's been helpful for me over the course of my career and thinking about leadership from the lens of being an influencer and how our awareness of ourselves and others can really help grow that. You know, just taking a look at the participants so far, boy, a number of you I know I would count as colleagues and former friends. Some are current colleagues and friends, and a number of you I don't yet know. But again, just like Juliana said, we assume that spending some time at 6 o'clock in the evening talking and thinking and being expanded in our approach to leadership is something that's important to you. So I hope I can add some value tonight as the other speakers have this summer. And I would agree that we hope that you'll continue on your leadership journey and continue to build your skills as we go forward. So I'm going to start here. Just there's a lot of different definitions of leadership. You probably have your own mental model of that. And I'm not going to give you one that has to substitute for yours, but I'll give you a sense of the way I tend to think of leadership. And it really begins with influence. You know, one of my mentors, if you will, John Maxwell, who's probably one of the most prolific writers in this space over the last 40 years, sort of boils down leadership to influence, nothing more, nothing less. Now, you know, some might think that's a little too reductionist. And there's a lot more to leadership, vision casting and public speaking and business acumen. There's certainly a lot that goes into the leadership portfolio. But when you boil it all down, I think influence, hopefully you'll agree this evening, is the essence of what leadership is all about. Because obviously as a physician leader, if you're not influencing, whether you're in an office setting with your staff, in a multi-specialty group, your colleagues, if you're in a health delivery system or a large organization or academics, whatever the role that you're in, it's really going to, at the end of the day, all be about how effective you can be on influencing those that you work with forward on whatever your mission and vision is. Now, in the last few years, in my most recent role, I've kind of refined this particular definition of leadership influence to really move more directly into the skillful use of influence to create really environments, create an environment or a culture, if you will, that allow the people that you have the privilege of working with to do their very best work toward the goals of the team that you are leading. So my leadership executive coach that I've had for the last 8 years in my previous role really helped me really think about not just general influence, but if you will, more specific or tactical influence to move these things forward. One of the ways I like to think about this and teach this to colleagues is to think in terms of trust. So we're thinking now of influence. We're trying to influence people. And the model that I tend to think about in this sense is that at the essence of influence has to be a trust equation. You know, similar to that we have in the doctor-patient relationship, there's a level of trust, that professional doctor-patient piece that our patients put into us. Likewise, as a leader, we have to create an environment where our colleagues who are looking to us to lead them can trust us. And so the metaphor that I think about is the thinking about trust like a currency. currently the dollar and the euro are about on par as far as currencies on the world market. And there are going to be things that are happening in the macroeconomy that are going to change that currency. It's either going to be inflated or deflated. So if you think about trust as a currency, we can do things. There can be steps and behaviors and attitudes that we can have that it can increase our trust currency or equation that can help in our ability to influence others. And as you see in this model that a colleague has shared with me, again, it's simplistic, but I think it's helpful handle to grab onto this. There's over on the right side, my right side, is the whole competence area. As a leader, we build trust with people if we know what we're doing. Of course, we would know this as clinicians, that you have to be able to have clinical skills and competency in your clinical area. As a leader, you need to have skills, capabilities, knowledge, experience in the business of medicine or in academic medicine or in whatever field or aspect of healthcare that you're finding yourself leading. But also, you don't tend to get promoted or stay in a position very long unless you're able to generate some results. You're building a reputation. There has to be some credibility. There needs to be performance that help lead to your sense of competence. So that's an area that's really important to work on. And yet tonight, we're going to spend a little more time talking in terms of character, that other piece, the soft skills, so-called, that really at the end of the day, really tend to drive or derail leaders. And it really comes down to their character. What's their intent over on that left side? Are they seen to be a caring individual that can create healthy relationships with their colleagues? Are they transparent and open about their own mistakes and their own uncertainties as they lead, particularly in healthcare in an uncertain time? Are they men and women of integrity? Are they honest? Are they fair? Are they authentic? So we want to unpack that a little bit as we go forward this evening. So as we think about this, how do I specifically, me, as a participant, think about how to build up my trust currency? Well, as I commented, the competence piece, that right side of that equation, are skills that can be learned. And a shameless advertisement tonight for this program that the ArMA is sponsoring in this physician leadership course. So again, looking at the participants tonight, you are leaders. That's my frame. We're all leaders. We all influence somebody. But if you want to increase the span of your influence, have a greater impact in the ecosystem that you find yourself, you probably want to build some further skills around competence. And a course like this one this fall is a great way to do that. And as we're talking about character, I think it really does begin a lot with awareness. And that's where I want to spend most of our time this evening, thinking in terms of our character, our leadership character, and the awareness about our own situation and those around us that can help us be influential leaders. All right. So in this particular model, leadership awareness has three spheres. You might want to think about it like concentric circles. And the first place that we're going to start, of course, is self-awareness. And this is so important as a leader because, again, we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, we all have vulnerabilities, we all have areas that if we're not aware of and regulate can really get us into trouble and really diminish our trust in that influence equation. The second dimension is other awareness. You can be very self-aware as a person, but if you don't have an ability to connect with people and understand what their key drivers are and influence them, then you're not going to be very effective as a leader, particularly as a physician leader. And then all this is well and good, but of course we live in an environment that is got changes going on. Healthcare is going through some significant transformations right now. Some of that was going on well before the pandemic. Much of it now has been accelerated in through the pandemic and some of the economic issues we're facing right now. And there are times like we've all experienced in the last couple of years where there is a point where sometimes the environment is so unstable or so changing or so complex that we really have to exercise actually new muscles as leaders. And that's where agility is required. And we'll kind of finish up on that this evening about some of the lessons that I learned as a regional chief medical officer taking a large group through a pandemic and thinking about what I needed to grow around my agility skills as a leader and some of the things that you might be thinking about in your leadership environment. Well, let's start with self-awareness again, and let's think in terms of emotional intelligence. I think the participants, all of you, are aware of emotional intelligence, codified some 30 years ago. It's really been in both a business literature as well as a number of other leadership development environments. But I just want to kind of remind us this evening about the 5 core qualities that drive emotional intelligence, or your emotional coefficient, if you will, or your quotient, as opposed to the IQ, which is maybe somewhat set and can only grow under a certain level. You can really grow your emotional intelligence. But as we're talking about tonight, it starts with self-awareness. Self-awareness is really that first step in attaining a higher level of emotional intelligence, and it's that understanding and knowing oneself. Formally defined, it's the ability to focus on yourself and how your thoughts, actions, emotions might or might not align with your own internal standards. We all have an internal compass on what's right and wrong, what really sort of drives us from the perspective of our integrity. And self-awareness sort of gives us that sort of internal barometer of that ability of how well we're behaving, if you will, and thinking and acting around what our internal compass point is. So that's self-awareness, and that's where we start when we talk about emotional intelligence. Now, that's wonderful to be able to know that, and to know that there are things that maybe push our emotional buttons, or we're in a stress situation where we may be economically challenged, or we may be ill, or we may be short an MA in our clinic, and there are some things that maybe from an alignment standpoint are out of sorts. But if we don't have some self-regulation, some self-filtering, if you will, some self-awareness of how those behaviors, verbal and nonverbal, can affect others, that can diminish our emotional intelligence as well. To round out those 5 qualities, in addition to self-awareness and self-regulation, we've got empathy, which is an important part. We've got motivation. In other words, what are the internal drivers that make us do what we do? And then finally, there are some social skills. And I think we all sort of appreciate this as clinicians, but particularly as you move more and more into a leadership role, and more where we're working in matrix or complex organizations, where the ability to read a social context and a changing culture that we're in are very important, that we need to be thoughtful and intentional in growing those skills as well. And that will be a topic for a future discussion. Don't you love Mark Twain? I just think Mark Twain, such a pithy, thoughtful writer, poet, humorist from a bygone day. But I love this particular quote, and this is going to feed into our thinking about being an influencer and our own self-awareness. So, Mark Twain said the 2 most important days in your life are, of course, the day that you were born, but surprisingly, the second is, and the day that you find out why. So we're all dropped here on Earth, and depending upon your worldview, whether you came from a created being or just happened on the Earth, it's important to realize that we have a purpose for our lives. And it's important to discover that as a leader. And it's important to help the people that we work with, help them try to figure out what their purpose is, because the more we're in alignment with our purpose, the more possible it is to influence people and move them forward, including ourselves. You may have seen this model before, this 4-circle intersecting Venn diagram. The things in life that you love to do. You just think about your hobbies, perhaps medicine, other things that you just love to do, you feel called to. There are things likewise there at 3 o'clock that the world needs, or they need physicians, they need nurses, they need respiratory therapists. There's a need for healthcare professionals in our particular sector. At 6 o'clock, there are things that you're paid for. It would be nice if we're independently, have the independent resources to do things in a voluntary sense, but for most of us, we need to make a living. And so there is that aspect of things that are in the world that we can get paid for. And then finally, at 9 o'clock, there are things that you are particularly great at, that you were designed for, that you've been training for, that you're experienced for. Well, if we look at the first intersection between things that we love and the things that the world needs, we call that a mission. That intersection is known as a mission. This next intersection between things that the world needs and things that you can get paid for, of course, is called a vocation. And if you can get paid for it and you're great at it, and this would relate to us as physicians on this call tonight, then that's a profession. It's an honor, it's a privilege, it's noble to be called into healthcare. We've worked many years in education and residency training and experience and honed our ability to be really great or on the pathway to becoming great, and we're paid for it, and that's a profession. And then if you're great at it and you love it, that's seen as a passion. And yet you see there's this little area right in the middle where all four of these Venn circles in this Venn diagram model come together. And that is important to discover as your purpose, where your mission, your vocation, your profession, and your passion all can come together to be your purpose or your identity, the reason that you're doing what you're doing. So what is self-leadership? So we've been thinking about being an influencer and the importance of trust and character and skills and self-awareness to become purposeful. So what is self-leadership? Self-leadership really describes how you lead your own life. So hopefully you have a pretty settled sense of who you are and why you're doing what you're doing. Though you may be on this call tonight because you perceive you're either in a transition or you're perceiving that you may be going into a transition. And one of the important things I find as I mentor and coach colleagues, and even have spent time thinking about this myself as I've moved now into a sort of semi-retired phase of my life and career, is really what am I good at? What am I designed? What's my purpose? Because self-leadership then is setting a course, your course, on the things that you're really great at, the things that you've been designed and purposeful to do. And then following it. So we want to know who we are. We want to know what that course is to pursue that as a leader. And then we want to follow it. But of course, life isn't a straight path, and there's headwinds and challenges and things that comes into a life that sometimes knock us off cue. And so we also have to be able to correct it as we go. There needs to be that sort of compass point of knowing purposefully who we are, where we're going, and correcting as we go, given life's experiences and the skills that we've been building along the way. Another way of looking at this really is then this whole area of self-leadership is really the practice of four areas. The literature would suggest that those of us who know who we are and are purposely following that tend to have greater career success, however you want to measure that, and satisfaction. And I believe well-being, we're talking a lot about right now about clinician and leadership well-being and emotionally healthy leaders. And I think the more that you're purposefully in your swim lane, if you will, how you were designed, the more success and satisfaction, and I think well-being that you'll have, because you're more purposeful, as you can see, as that core practice. You can be more mindful, more intentional about what you invest your time in and what you say no to. You can be more reflective as things are either working out or not working out. You sort of have a ability to monitor what's working and isn't. And I don't think, and I know in my own 40-year career, maybe I wasn't as reflective to pause and to celebrate the successes or unpack maybe some of the reversals that I and my team experience. So I think one of the things that I personally want to continue to work on is that area of reflecting on, am I doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing? And then practicing, I mean, taking a step forward and stretch assignments, maybe moving into a new area in your organization or in a professional society like ArMA, or in a civics situation, or in your neighborhood or in your church or synagogue, whatever that looks like, to actually begin to practice some of these skills that you're learning around both character as well as the business skills that you're learning. So that's a big part of this whole area of self-leadership. Okay, well, enough on that. I think that's so important. I've spent most of the time and most of the slides on that, and you're going to get copies of these slides if you want to reflect some more on. There's a lot of great writing in this space, but I do think, in my own experience, and I think those of you that are on the call can relate to the fact that we don't really know ourselves and know really what we can bring and put onto the field as a leader, and really sort of grow that and be aware of that, then we're not going to be as effective as we could be. But at the end of the day, we work in a healthcare ecosystem, right? And again, whether it's a practice that you own or running with a partner, or whether you're in a multi-specialty group or a large organization, or whatever that looks like, we're just working with other people. And so it's so important to be an influential leader, a leader who can be transformative in healthcare at this very vulnerable time. And so as a leader, as we become other aware, we are really performing an important act for the people that we're serving as we lead them and ultimately lead our organization. It's really important as a leader to be other aware. You know, Tom Peters, many of you may be familiar with that name, a management expert and professor from Stanford, wrote in a very famous book a number of years ago that organizations exist to serve. I mean, at the end of the day, and particularly in healthcare, we're a service industry, you know, we exist to serve our patients, our families, our communities, period. So, but leaders, likewise, we live to serve. So in many ways, we don't lead just to be at the top of the pyramid. We lead wherever we are in an organization to help the organization serve whatever community or constituency or stakeholder group that's necessary. I would agree with him on that. John Maxwell, who I referenced earlier, boils it down another way. Put another way, the very heart of leadership is serving people. So in this perspective of other awareness, we need to be really thinking in terms of how we can serve those we have the privilege of working with and leading day to day. Of course, the pivot then is we need to have an ongoing self-awareness and self-leadership, as I've been saying, but it really, if you will, is a pivot to not just ourselves, but to leading others. And that's a big part of this. It's really that awareness of and attunement with others. So let me give you some kind of specific ideas on how to approach this. We're talking again about influence. Again, I know people are sort of joining us here in the middle. So going back to my working definition of leadership, it's really all around influence, becoming a man or woman, a physician leader of influence. We talked about trust, character, and skills. So if we want to be a person of influence with others, there are a few elements of that. We want to have and display a consistency of integrity with people that we work with. We want to nurture people in the sense of knowing that we're all on a journey. None of us have arrived. Hopefully, we all have this open mind set, this growth mindset. I think that's why you're with us tonight, to try and learn a little bit more about how you can continue to grow as a leader. And hopefully, you're nurturing and pouring into people around you. I think it's important to have faith in people, to see the potential in people, to sort of see the opportunity as you nurture and work with people. Of course, listening is a key skill. We know that as clinicians, the years that I was training residents and medical students, I mean, particularly in primary care, I mean, really a well-taken history, really the ability to actively listen to people, really typically will give you the evidence of where the issue is. And likewise, that's so transferable into leadership, that really listening to people, reading people, understanding people, this whole area of other awareness is a critical skill to be an influencer. And therefore, yet to understand people, understand like ourselves, that we're wired with strengths and vulnerabilities and weaknesses, how are the people that we work with, how they're similarly wired, and how we can help them be everything they want and need to be. And of course, that gets into mentoring. It's like nurturing other people, but then maybe even more specifically, there's certain people that are in your sphere of influence that really need your active mentoring and really very, if you will, tactical pouring into them. And then empowering people. And a part of the whole growth piece, and I'm just so thankful over the years that the leaders and role models in my life we're doing these things, these 7 things, and then we're giving me opportunity to be empowered, giving me stretch assignments, giving me some areas where I could try some things, not always successful, but they really had my back and helped me grow. And that's what I think we should be doing as physician leaders moving forward, being people of influence. You know, one of the ways I've always thought about this, and hopefully this is kind of a helpful way for particularly those of us and you who work in an organization, again, even if it's your own practice, but if you're in an organization, whether it's ArMA or whether it's, you know, one of the large systems that we have or some other alignment, you know, as a leader, we typically over here on the right side know that the organization has needs. It has a vision, a mission, has goals, has certain financial and quality performance that it must meet. And when you're in a leadership role, particularly when you're in a titled leadership role, you have what we call agency. You're expected to meet and drive the needs of the organization. But obviously, organizations are a collection of people. So over here on the left side, we have a collection of people who have their own personal and professional dreams and desires and needs. And really, that balance we have as leaders is to try and keep this intersection between these 2 areas as overlapped as possible for the individuals we have the chance to lead. And part of it, as we're talking about tonight, is really that ability to help people understand what their purpose is and to sort of help line up our organizational needs very intentionally with the purposes. Because when we do, we get what's called creative engagement. This is really what bounces you out of bed on a Monday morning, maybe even if you've been on call all weekend, is that sense that what I am doing is purposeful, it's within my design, my purpose, and the organization, wherever I am working, sort of needs me, wants me to contribute, and therefore I can be creatively engaged in that area. And that's one of the real keys to being a leader, is to managing that overlap. Managing the organization so it's successful and it's sustainable, but managing the people in your sphere of influence so we can best we can manage that intersection. Now, sometimes organizations move in a different direction and people move in a different direction, and that overlap becomes either very thin or non-existent, and people move on. And that's okay if it's done maybe somewhat without a lot of drama around it, because that just happens. It's happened to me in my career that I was going to move in a different direction. But I think as leaders, it's important to recognize, particularly in this time where we're having a shrinking workforce and a lot of the key roles that we have are hard to attract people into our organizations and retain them. I think it's important to remind ourselves that people across all industry, but I think this is really true in healthcare, are really motivated by 3 primary key drivers. One is a noble cause. And I think we have an ability in healthcare to really create a vision, something that's inspirational, aspirational, noble, that really can excite people that we work with. And many times as a leader, we need to repeat that, particularly at a time like now where people are very, very discouraged and burned out and dissatisfied. We have to really, not in an artificial way, but in a real way, come back and remind people of the nobility of whatever your organizational focus is on. Secondly, people really are motivated by working with people they enjoy. And this is a piece, of skill that we have to all build is, we work in teams, complex teams, interprofessional teams, and really not necessarily always, they're our best friends, but really creating an environment where people can really enjoy using their talents and leveraging the talents of their colleagues. It's an important motivator. And then finally, personal growth opportunities. Really, people, regardless of their educational background, where they are in their career, most everybody is highly motivated by an opportunity to continue to grow personally and professionally. And so as a leader, and as a leader of influence, be mindful about these 3 key drivers as you're building teams and driving your organization. So we have a few more minutes, and I just want to come to that third, if you will, outer ring of awareness, and that is the environmental awareness. And, perhaps some of you tonight are in a relatively new job. I know a couple of you are, some of you are perhaps again in a transition thinking about a new job. And one of the things that happens is if you're newly promoted within your organization or newly appointed from outside, you really have to quickly get a handle on understanding the business model of the organization and or the department or unit that you have. You really need to do a look back, at least the last couple of years, on the performance of the unit. So this is that environmental or situational awareness that's important as a leader. Understand the financial drivers and cycles and some of the other performance measures that the organization that you're leading is responsible for. And really, we all are working with internal stakeholders, people we work with, and outside stakeholders, whether it's a board or whatever that might look like. So we really have to be aware. I know when I took the most recent job I retired from 9 years ago, a very, very helpful book for me was a book that is not unique to healthcare. It's called The First 90 Days. It's on the Harvard Business Review top 100 books of all time. It was rewritten about a decade ago by Michael Watkins. Really is a great handbook on how you think about in a new leadership role, again, whether it's promotional or into an organization. It's really a roadmap on how you can understand the business aspects and also the cultural and political environment that you're in so you can be a successful leader quickly. And now, finally, I just want to take a moment and talk about leadership agility. And again, as I commented at the top, that sometimes life changes, and certainly it did for us in the United States and really in the world, and particularly in Arizona in March of 2020. And so that is this ability to take effective action in a complex, rapidly changing condition. And though we're a couple of years into the pandemic, I'm sure that there continues to be challenges that we'll continue to face in the healthcare environment. And whether it's the team or the organization, agility really refers to the same set of capabilities in teams and organizations. Several articles as I really thought about this as our organization, Dignity Health, like the other systems in the state of Arizona, move themselves into the pandemic preparedness and execution. As we really looked at what are some of the key characteristics of leadership agility. So here's the top 8. Courage. It's not to be afraid to change course. And sometimes there's sort of this deer in the headlights, but we can't get frozen as leaders. We really have to have the courage, even if we don't fully know what's going on, like most of us didn't know 2.5 years ago as we got into the pandemic. We have to have the courage to move forward. We have to have the ability, in many ways, the leadership agility requires an uptick in our ability to listen, both listen internal to our organization and really sort of, if you will, increase our awareness, our radar on what's going on in the environment. I know I had to do that leading a large organization through a pandemic. We need to collaborate in ways we never did collaborate. I think many of you know the story that, in essentially April of 2020, all of us that were the clinical leaders of all the big systems of the state, we just chose no longer to set aside the gotcha game, and we were just going to collaborate and share best practices and make sure we were in a situation where we could do the very best we could in the state of Arizona, both its delivery systems, the academic environments, the universities, the public health side, really do the very best we could to collaborate together because of a public health emergency. And that's a part of leadership agility, as is being proactive. Again, being a very good communicator, not only being a great listener, but really over communicating. It's a time of uncertainty for the folks you're working with, to really try not to say too much. Some of it needs to be sort of simple, repeatable messages, but to really up our game as a communicator. Boy, discipline is such an important part of this. There's so much noise in the system, and what is distinguishing what's important from what's urgent, those urgent and important things, the top quadrant that we have to deal with, but really being disciplined to really sort of push some of that noise, some of that white noise out of the way to move forward, to really go the course. I mean, some of this is going to require long periods of time, so we have to take good care of ourselves. I know a number of us tomorrow will be participating in a a large collaborative well-being design session because we've been thinking a lot about building a more and more resilient clinical healthcare workforce for the state of Arizona. So a lot of us have been thinking about how we can build the tools and the better practices to keep us all resilient, particularly as leaders as we go through this. And then joining us tonight, I hope is a demonstration that we're lifelong learners. Clearly, we have to maintain our certification in our clinical domains, but as a leader, we really need to lean into an open mindset. None of us is ever going to arrive and really continuing to grow. So as we kind of put an end to this tonight, and we have a little time for some dialogue together, some questions and answers. Again, leadership has many definitions. I'm working on the model tonight that we're all leaders, and it's all about influence. It's more of a question of who we're influencing, how we're influencing them, how we skillfully use our influence to create environments where people can understand their purpose and therefore do their best work. Hopefully that's in alignment with the organization or team that we're leading. Again, that creative engagement Venn diagram I showed you a few slides ago. And finally, just again, thinking in terms of that trust equation. At the end of the day, particularly in healthcare where we're leading peers, boy, it's all about trust. It's all about not only having the skills and the ability to sort of know clinical and the business side of medicine, but really be a man or woman of character. So Juliana, I'm going to toss it back to you. I'm going to thank you for the opportunity to give you some of my thoughts in this space and look forward now to opening it up for some comments, some pushback, maybe some better practices that we could all learn from.
Thank you, Dr. Frey, for that insightful presentation. We really appreciate that. Your understanding of leadership is just so vast. And I know many of our attendees are anxious to ask follow-up questions and learn some more from you. So let's kick off the Q&A session. To our attendees, if you have any questions for Dr. Frey, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. While you're working on submitting your questions, I will turn the moderation responsibilities over to ArMA's devoted president, Dr. Hartmark Hill, who will lead tonight's Q&A session with Dr. Frey. In addition to being ArMA's 131st president, Dr. Hartmark Hill is a Mayo Clinic trained family medicine specialist, an alum of the University of Arizona College of Medicine, Tucson, and an award-winning medical educator at the UA College of Medicine, Phoenix. She currently serves in many capacities at UACOM. I don't know how you do it all, acting as director of the Faculty Development Fellowship, director of the Program for Narrative Medicine and Health Humanities, and director of the Patient-Centered Care Curriculum. Dr. Hartmark Hill, thank you for joining us tonight. And it looks like we are ready to begin the questions for Dr. Frey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Juliana. And really wonderful to hear your message tonight, Dr. Frey. And I welcome people to put their questions in the chat. We'll turn it over. But, I want to also acknowledge my gratitude for your influence in my training, because I certainly have benefited greatly. And so I'm going to turn things over to some of the questions here. Excellent question from Dr. Craig. As first up, has your definition of leadership changed over the course of your career?
It has. I did my residency training in the United States Air Force, had a lot of military training, both a military college background. And, I knew when I got into healthcare that it was never really going to be about command and control. But I think early in my leadership journey, I thought maybe I had a little more control over my colleagues than it turned out to be the case. And, we are all trained, we're independent thinkers. And I think I realized with some mistakes I made early in my 30s and some of my early leadership roles that it was really about building relationships with folks and hearing them, understanding. I might even not agree, but at the end of the day, it really was relational leadership and really being able to harvest the best thinking from the group. So yeah, I am matured. I continue to mature. I've learned a lot over the last couple of years. My last role was a real stretch assignment for me. And then the pandemic was a real stretch. And I came to appreciate that I was not a subject matter expert in a lot of stuff. A lot of my role was to sort of influence and bring people together so we got the best ideas. So great question.
Agree, and thank you for that answer. Our next question is from Dr. Bethel, who asks, how would you suggest navigating professional growth and increase the clinic's income when the budget and operations are largely managed by leaders not in practice and largely unavailable? So definitely a challenge, though, is familiar.
Wow. Yeah. Gee, that sounds like healthcare right now. Yeah. Way back, and it's kind of lost a little bit of the rhythm, but those of you who might have been around for a while may be familiar with a lot of the thinking that came out of Harvard Business School maybe 25 years ago around the balanced scorecard, and really kind of came around to the whole issue is and this is the way I've always thought about it, and with the leaders I've worked with, is let's focus in on doing the core business. As I think about the value equation in healthcare, value has got a numerator and a denominator, and the numerator is quality. Is when we have evidence, making sure that we deliver the very best quality, or at least minimizing variation. The second piece that's the Q. The next part of the variable is an S, and that's around satisfaction of the patient's experience. We are in a service industry, and so as we deliver high quality care, we're providing the very best service to our patients, satisfaction, if you will. The second S is safety. We have to deliver safe care, right? We have to really not be as error-free as possible. And we all know it's a complex environment. It's a lot of human system, a lot of human factor stuff, but really as leaders to really be trying and drive not only variation out, but really making it a safe environment. And over the last few years, I've added kind of a third S, and that's sustainability. And that's really all around a sustainable workforce, a healthy workforce, emotionally well-being, understanding the drivers of burnout, and trying to create environments. That's our role. It's really our unique role as clinical leaders. And I would argue, with our nursing colleagues, but primarily as the physicians, we need to drive the numerator. Now, the denominator is care, is the cost. And more with population health, it's a cost as a function of time. So it's not just an episode of care, but it's care over a cycle of care. So it's not an easy answer. I don't mean to deflect, but I think the more we can lead as physicians, administrators can't really drive this like we can. We should see a trickle-down effect with less wasteful care, higher performance care, and a better bottom line. It's not going to be in the short term, but that's kind of the way I think about it, Jen.
I really appreciate that. And I think that aligns with many of the things that you've spoken about this evening, exerting our influence, bringing our perspective to the table, and doing so in a very emotionally intelligent way that builds trust. So thank you for that answer. We have a great lineup of questions coming in. Dr. Glasser asks, or she mentions, your comment about discipline resonates with me. Can you offer more advice on setting these priorities as you move between immediate problems and longer range goals?
Gosh, good question. Yeah, well, there's that tyranny of the urgent, right? I mean, whatever role we're in, whether, for the last couple of years, I haven't been directly seeing patients. I've been supporting the care teams, but, it is always that balance about what's right in front of us, what's the job that would be done. But, it comes back to that self-leadership I was talking about, but making sure we create in some way, some reflective time to really be thinking in terms of, what are our intermediate and longer term goals? Am I really, and what I'm doing right now, is it really moving me forward? And of course, life is life, and sometimes there is no margin, or the margin gets kicked. But one of the things I found over the years is that I have to find some time, whether I can carve it into my work schedule or even into some of my time off, is some reflective time, whether it's a long walk, whether it's some time with my spouse, whether it's either some time to sort of reflect on my annual goals. I personally tend to spend, that time between Christmas and New Year's, where there's a little bit of downtime, to sort of reflect back and really look forward and really try to set some personal goals for myself. But it's a challenge. Maybe others have some insights that I could use.
Indeed, it's an ongoing, and I think moving target, and then also a need for that ongoing lifelong learning that you mentioned. So we have a question from Dr. Laughlin, who asks, what advice would you give to resident physicians who are interested in a leadership role in their future? Love that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And Dr. Hart-Markell, you're a great example because as a resident, you were obvious. I was telling Juliana before we started, it's pretty obvious to those of us who were your faculty at Mayo, you're a leader, and we want to nurture that. And I think part of this is, at the end of the day, I think it's very important that we focus on being excellent clinicians. As a physician leader, you really can't get to first base as a leader if you're a mediocre leader physician. You have to be able to be maybe not the top of the group, but you have to be respected by your partners, by your colleagues. You really have to be solid clinically, and you have to keep up. So I think medical students and residents who see leadership as part of their future, like I did at that time, really can't afford to abandon really pursuing excellence in whatever their clinical discipline is. Now, at the same time, when you look around yourself, there's all sorts of opportunities to influence. And that's why I love this definition of leadership. It's influence. Whether you're influencing on rounds, whether you're influencing a medical student, the new residents that are coming in this summer, whether there's a project that you can have a faculty work with you on. Really looking for opportunities to influence. Just let the titles follow, kind of work on growing your ability to connect with people and influence both yourself and others. I think it will serve you well.
Excellent insight on that. Thank you so much. Dr. Carroll asks, he starts out by saying, thank you, Dr. Frey, for your insights and your commitment to compassionate change in healthcare. Could you speak to mentorship and how we can all benefit from lifelong mentoring, including from colleagues and collaborators across generations and perspectives?
Well, thanks, Mark, and thank you for your partnership in leading the parade here on trying to understand wellness among our healthcare professionals in Arizona. Great colleague. Yeah, mentorship is so important, and I think those of us who have spent our careers in education realize that part of the professionalization process is the role of mentors. Mentors have a key formative role in the development of us as professionals and as clinicians, and the same is true as leaders. And so I think we all should find a mentor, have a mentor. Those mentors change over time. There's seasons that we need new things, new mentors. Don't be afraid to approach somebody and sit down and create a conversation and sort of seek a mentor. I think that's really important. So we all should try and have a mentor in our lives. And then we all should be, I was using this analogy, we shouldn't be reservoirs. We shouldn't be storing all this information up. We really should be rivers. So, as we're collecting experience and knowledge, we need to be passing it downstream to those behind us. And so really, again, I can't say I am Dr. Hart-Markell's mentor, but I want to be available if there's enough chemistry and there's something that I can impart at a season of her career that would be helpful to her. So I think we need to be open to that. I think it's part of the profession of medicine. And I think we have, obviously clinically, that's the way we've been trained. And as leaders, we ought to take a lot of focus on that. So thanks, Mark.
I agree. Thank you, Mark. And thank you for speaking to that relational aspect. And I think you brought up some strong points in your talk too about how these types of approaches aligning with our purpose and our values will bring kind of joy and resilience to the practice of medicine. So good. We have another question. Dr. Modi, she says, thank you for taking the time to educate us about leadership. I especially appreciated your section on leadership agility. Are you aware of any study that looks at physicians and when in the course of their career they find out that their purpose in life is different than when they first started their journey in medicine? Great question.
Gosh, I don't know if I can point you to a great article. I know some of the chief medical officers in the state of Arizona, along with Dr. Carroll, who's on tonight's call, we have written about the collaborative experience that we had, some of the leadership agility things that we learned. There was an article that we got into the New England Journal Catalyst about a year and a half ago, and there's some manuscripts that we're still trying to, and a lot of us are teaching this in a variety of venues like tonight. I know, so I'm not sure there's a great specific answer. I do know that I would distinguish a little bit a mentor who tends to share their experience with somebody from a coach, which is somebody who is really doing some very specific skill building and leadership. And so though they're often used as synonyms, they really aren't, if you will. So one of the things that my coaches have helped me understand that there are transitions or seasons or pieces. Some of us remain clinicians for 40 or 50 years, and that's exactly our purpose, and we get great satisfaction. Some of us just, have changes, and sort of pausing, reflecting, thinking about that, and spending some time either by yourself or with a coach to sort of formalize that but I'm sorry, I can't give you a specific reference on that.
But well articulated in terms of the principles that are inherent therein. So thank you for that. We have a next question from Dr. Garuda, who asks about when people start out and they have a particular first impression. Are there steps that you take maybe to change that impression for a variety of reasons to be able to cross barriers and biases that arise?
So I'm assuming in a leadership role that there's been an impression that may not be the impression that one wanted. Well, I think all the leaders on here probably can identify that probably the deepest and best learning that we have done, and I know I have done, is when it hasn't gone well. And I think it's that sense of humility and creating psychological safety with your team or individuals and saying, boy, it sure appears as if I missed something, or, really taking ownership as the leader that, gosh, that's not what I intended, that impression or that approach. Can you help me understand your perspective that would help me grow and be more effective? And at the end of the day, I think we just have to be humble. This is not easy stuff, and it's growth. It's personal and professional growth.
Absolutely. And, something that you're saying I'm reflecting on that really resonates with me is that humility and vulnerability is really key to the courage that you spoke of, to engage in all of these uncertainties and unknown and lead with purpose. So thank you for that. Dr. Torres brings us back to some questions about generational differences, which I really appreciate. Over your years in leadership, have you needed to change approaches based on generational differences?
Is that Dr. Tony Torres?
It sure is.
The newly appointed president and CEO of Yavapai Regional Medical Center. Congratulations, Tony. You're a great leader, and it's been a privilege to get to know you. And yes, thank you. Yeah, isn't that a challenge? We have wonderfully, healthcare is being refreshed with new generations, people that are far smarter than I was when I went to medical school, but have different life needs and purposes and viewpoints of the world. And so that different generational piece, I think, is a real challenge for us as leaders, particularly those of us who maybe have some gray hair and were trained at a different time and have a little different view of medicine. I think part of it, again, comes back to humility and a growth mindset that we have to understand the key drivers. I really love those three key drivers: a noble cause, working with people you enjoy working with, and growth opportunities. Again, I don't know if I can give you great evidence on this, but my intuition is that's a connection point regardless of what generation people are in, that we can rally around that and learn from each other. And so I hope that helps. I know you're going to be a great leader there in Prescott for us.
And I'll add my congratulations, Dr. Torres. We'll close with one more question in the Q&A, and that's from Dr. Laughlin, who asks, as a leader, how do you overcome or work with a colleague or team member whose work or communication style clashes with your own?
Well, good question. And that happens a lot, right? That's real. And part of it we have to own, right? We have strengths, we have vulnerabilities. Some of it's theirs. So, and some of it you can do dyadically with safe conversation. Sometimes that's hard because either you're pretty polarized or there's a power differential that makes psychological safety more difficult. You got to bring in a third party, often a coach, communication skill coach. I'm a big proponent in my training over the last few years as a coach, really the importance of personality testing. There's a lot of great ones out there. I've been trained in a couple of them, but almost regardless of, if you can kind of get a baseline of how people are wired as a point, it doesn't mean one's right and one's wrong. We're just different. And how can we find common ground despite our different communication skills? But often it takes, particularly if there's some static electricity there, sometimes it takes a third party.
Well, thank you, Dr. Frey. Our wholehearted appreciation to you for sharing your wisdom tonight and for the ongoing work that you're doing. I'm going to turn things over to Ms. Juliana Stanley to conclude our event.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of tonight's presentation. Dr. Frey and Dr. Hartmark-Hill, thank you once again for sharing your collective knowledge and for your time this evening.
Thank you. Be well.